It is my hope, not for the sake of Donald Trump, not for the sake of Republicans or Democrats, not for the sake of any political party, but for the sake of the United States of America and all of our allies in the region, that this draft MOU that Bloomberg has gotten a hold of is nowhere near the final MOU, because this would be devastating. It would create in Iran a behemoth in that region and allow them to sell oil in a way they've never been able to sell oil, to make revenue the way they've never been able to get revenue. And again, this MOU at least puts the burden on the United States of raising the $300 billion in reconstruction costs. Reading through this draft MOU that Bloomberg has released and says is the MOU, it looks like we lost the war. You read through this and you say, wait a second, well, what about the nuclear program? Well, what this MOU says about the nuclear program is saying, pending a final agreement, it will remain, quote, status quo. The nuclear program will be status quo. So, again, it is my great hope that over the next several days, the sensitivities that J.D. Vance was talking about is the sensitivities of a Republican Senate that would be in open rebellion against something like this, and all of our allies in the region and probably across the world, because this MOU would create in Iran a behemoth stronger than it's ever been.
Yeah, I mean, a memorandum of understanding is an agreement to negotiate. So let's hope this is the starting off point. But even as a starting off point, it is shocking to read the United States of America conceding some of the things that you just laid out to Iran. If you go back to March the 1st, the morning after this war started, Donald Trump was talking explicitly about regime change. Remember, the nuclear program, he said, had been obliterated, and now it was going to completely wipe out Iran's military. As Defense Secretary Hegseth liked to say, the Navy's at the bottom of the sea. They're incapable of responding in any way. Of course, they've been responding for 4 months now around the Gulf. And you got to a lot of it, Joe, which is ending sanctions, unfreezing assets, and then the creation of this $300 billion investment fund, a private investment fund that, according to Reuters, would include some private American companies along with Gulf companies to pump $300 billion into Iran as an investment fund, a rebuilding fund for that country. It also, Jonathan Lemire, puts an awful lot of trust in a regime that deserves no trust whatsoever, which is to say, status quo on the nuclear program, you just promise us you're not going to pursue and develop a nuclear weapon. That's in writing right now. We'll see it changes by Friday. We'll see if it changes when the bigger negotiations come along. But right now, not a lot to be excited about if you're on the U.S. side.
Well, let's start here. It's not usually a vote of confidence in your deal when you won't let anybody read it. And so I think there is a real sense here the Trump administration knows privately this is not a good agreement. We had the president yesterday. He continues, not only has he accomplished none of the war aims they set out before this conflict began back in February, but yesterday we have him furiously back away from some of the things he has said all along needs to be done. He was asked about the Iran and the uranium dust they still have, and he says, quote, "You could make the case, why are you even bothering removing it? Because it's not really valuable." So even that, he's distancing himself from. And I wrote a piece that just published on The Atlantic this morning. This is a significant defeat for President Trump. This is for the United States. We exit this conflict weaker strategically, economically, militarily, and perhaps even morally when you consider the girls' school that we blew up in the first hours of the war, as well as the fact that we were in negotiations with Iran, seemingly not in good faith, because we then launched the attack soon thereafter. And for Trump, this is sort of a preview I write about how, particularly post-midterms, we'll see him become less and less relevant. He's still the president. Inherently, of course, he'll have power, but the rest of the world is learning to ignore him. We're seeing Iran get the best of him in these negotiations. And Ed Luce, yes, all the caveats that Joe and Willie just laid out, things perhaps could change on Friday. But a big part of this is a huge win for Iran in terms of the money that they're going to have access to, $300 billion from the Gulf, the ability to sell oil again, sanctions apparently being lifted, and no real enforcement mechanism in terms of the nuclear program going forward. As Willie said, and I report in the story, there are some voices in the administration who are skeptical about this. Hegseth, Rubio, Ratcliffe, saying we can't necessarily trust the Iranians to uphold their end of the deal, but Trump, so desperate to put this in his rearview mirror, going ahead anyway.
Going ahead anyway. I mean, the Obama deal had international weapons inspectors crawling all over Iran to check whether the deal was being upheld by Iran. So that will be one test. Will there be IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, inspections as and when they like all over Iran? And really, if you read this draft MOU, this 14-point draft, you do not get the impression that Iran is about to concede anything like what it did in 2015, which incidentally began with, in the prologue, the statement that Iran pledges not to produce a nuclear weapon. So that's nothing new. That is absolutely boilerplate language. But then if you listen to Vance, who's clearly, being designated as the fall guy here, describing Iran as having, after 47 years, finally seen the light. This has not been a good way of doing business. Now we're going to do business with the United States and we're going to be reasonable. I'm sorry, but that doesn't even pass the laugh test. Iran today is a considerably stronger regional power, a considerably more threatening one to Israel and other of America's allies than it was on February the 28th. There is no other way to see this than as a complete capitulation by President Trump, and really a moment of, I think, of, well, I'm not going to use the word shame, but I mean, a really bad moment for the United States.
Well, let's go to Capitol Hill, where Senate Majority Leader John Thune was asked specifically about whether he and other top Republicans have been briefed on what's included in this so-called Iran deal.
Has members of the cabinet have you been briefed on what's in the memorandum?
I certainly have not yet, although we are requesting that, and I assume we will at some point hear from the administration with greater specificity about what's in that memorandum. I mean, we're all hearing in generalities what's been reported so far, but until I get more specific information, I'm going to hesitate to say anything more about it.
And as lawmakers from both parties continue to express skepticism about the preliminary agreement, Senate Republicans say Congress should have a vote on any final deal. Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana said yesterday, if there is a final deal, and I hope there is, it should come to the Senate for approval. Republican Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana said the final agreement is a treaty, and it sounds like a treaty, he said. Then it certainly seems like the deal should be subject to a vote by Congress. Republican Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, who chairs the Senate Armed Services Committee, echoed his colleagues. President Trump, for his part, appears for now to agree, saying yesterday, I will send it to Congress. I like the idea. Well, I'm glad he likes the idea, David French. How do you think, David French, Congress will react to this if the reporting bears out of what we're hearing of what is in this MOU?
Well, here's the problem they have, because they failed and couldn't exercise their authority on the front end. They're in a box on the back end. So, yes, I absolutely agree. This should go before the Senate at the very least. This is absolutely a treaty by any understanding of the word. So, yeah, the United States Senate should weigh in here. But the problem is, and they'll know this, if they say no to this, if they say no, what does that mean? Does that mean a very unpopular war restarts? Does that mean that negotiations restart? What next? Because we were sort of led into this war without these kinds of questions being asked and answered on the front end. Here we are in allegedly the back end with Congress trying to reassert itself, but no real plan B here at all.
Joe, I would just point out the New York Post this morning, a rare moment. when you've lost the New York Post. Love bomb. The New York Post ripping President Trump on this deal for showering, it says, this regime with money, the lifting of sanctions, and this $300 billion investment fund for funding the radical regime. That's the New York Post going after Donald Trump. And just one more point, if the big victory in this is that the Strait of Hormuz is open, well, the Strait of Hormuz was open on February the 28th when the war started. Right. So if that's considered the big win of this, and it would be for people paying a lot of money at the gas pump right now here in the United States, boy, the bar's gotten really low.
It's gotten really low. If you look at the beginning of the war, the president had threatened the Iranians, said, if you continue to shoot people in the streets of Iran, we're going to come in, and suggested we were going to liberate them. And he called for the liberation of the Iranian people and the changing of the regime and getting rid of the Islamic regime. And so, again, I just want to underline this, Willie. Again, we don't know. We have reporting from Bloomberg. Michael Weiss is talking about it and reporting about what's in this MOU. What we've seen is a draft MOU from Bloomberg. But we also, though, we do get some of that confirmed in pieces. The Wall Street Journal confirming that, in fact, the sanctions are going to be lifted, which, again, if you talk to anybody before Donald Trump won re-election in 2024, they would tell you, they would go on and on about how it was Biden that was responsible for what happened in Israel because they lifted sanctions. They let them out of the box. It's all I heard repeatedly. Oh, you can't lift sanctions on Iran. Well, they're talking about lifting sanctions on Iran